Hey everybody, how you doing? I am Ben Griffith, and this is the Ben Griffith Breakdown. So we have not put out a video in a little while, and I could not think of a better topic to wade back into the fray on than the war that is happening in Israel versus Hamas. So a few things I want to go over today. Kind of a quick recap of what has happened so far, and I think many of you have probably been following it, but I just want to kind of go through the events as they've transpired. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the area, recent history, 1900s, and some of the conflicts that have happened with Hamas in Israel leading up to this. I really want to dive into a lot of the misconceptions, mistruths, and rhetoric that have been being thrown around and have led to, high levels of anti-Semitism across the country, as well as the international response, especially from the United States politicians and other government officials. So let's get right into it. As most of you know, on October 7th, Israel was attacked in one of the most brutal and barbaric ways we've seen in recent history. 1,400 people were killed, over 200 people were taken hostage. The people who were killed were done so in a abhorrent, horrific way. People were beheaded, burned to death. Babies were killed, elderly people were killed, children killed in front of their parents, parents killed in front of their children, women were raped, gang raped, and then murdered. I mean, things that it's hard to imagine that humans are still doing to other humans in 2023. And we know that there's evil in the world and we hear about it, but to see it done on such a large scale has been overwhelming, to say the least, to the world. So, obviously, the immediate response from the Israelis was an overwhelming military campaign that include large-scale bombings across Gaza, and in an effort to take out Hamas leadership, Hamas architecture, operation centers, tunnels, weapons caches, etc. And in doing so, has created a large-scale set of civilian casualties, and Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth, and in an effort to attack that type of a population, it is next to impossible to do so without civilian casualties. And in addition to that, we're going to talk about this a little bit, but Hamas is using civilians as human shields, which makes the issue even harder. So there was a pause in the fighting where there was a hostage exchange and they got a large number of them back. I think just under right around half, I believe, of the hostages back. The hostages that are still in Gaza, their whereabouts and condition are widely unknown, which is terrifying for those families. And since that pause happened, the military campaign has gone back to full force, and there's now bombings again. There's now a ground war that has taken place in an urban setting, which is one of the most dangerous settings that any military can fight a war, for obvious reasons. And my personal belief is that this conflict within Gaza is the beginning of a wider conflict in the region. I believe that this is going to metastasize further out. You're already seeing Hezbollah attacking from the north, from Lebanon, the Houthi rebels firing ballistic missiles into Israel. You're seeing U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq being attacked by Iranian proxies. And let me be clear, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels are all Iranian-backed proxies and are funded and directed by Iran. And this attack that happened on October 7th was funded and directed by Iran. So we have taken steps in retaliation, some of these attacks that have been on our base, but not nearly aggressive enough, in my opinion. And the reason I say that is because those attacks continue. So they're clearly not aggressive enough to be a deterrent. So I think sooner or later we are going to have to get much more aggressive, and that obviously is going to escalate to further conflict. So I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that I am. Before we get into it any further, I just want to say that on this channel, we typically try to look at both sides of an issue. I did, some of the different topics in the past, one of them being abortion. We looked at both sides of abortion and the laws, and we always try to find kind of the shade of gray that is the truth, based on the facts and the figures and the constitutionality and this sort of thing, right? This issue is a very one-sided issue. The Israelis, while not perfect, were attacked in a brutal way by barbaric terrorists. So, and I think that a lot of people don't understand the full set of issues here, and it has led to some moral equivocation and some justification of these attacks by people, including some U.S. politicians. So, once again, kind of the mistruths, misconceptions, and rhetoric. And I think one of the most basic misconceptions that I hear as I'm talking to people is they don't understand that Israel was created in 1948 by the UN. And I think one of the things that people think is that in 1948, it was just Palestinians in Israel, and the UN came in and said, hey, we know you guys live here, but now you're being relegated to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and we're giving it to the Jews, and now the Jews have all of Israel. That could not be further from the truth. Jews have been living in and around Israel for roughly 3,000 years, back to BC. And while their numbers have gone up and down in the area as world events moved them around, they have always been there. And in the early 1900s, you started to see them kind of filtering back into the area. In the 1920s, Britain took over Palestine and was basically running that region. And they were managing clashes between the Jewish people in the Arab community for years. And then in 1948, the UN stepped in and said, okay, we are going to create a two-state solution here. And they drew out a map where there were Arab areas and there were Jewish areas. And if you look at that map, and this is very important, the Arab people in the region were given roughly 50% of Israel. They had a very large section of Israel that was given to them. However, immediately, and I mean immediately after that resolution was put in place, they tried to take the Jewish areas back by force. And it wasn't just the Arabs in that region, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, all joined in that fight. The British stepped in, helped quell that rebellion, for lack of a better term. And what came out of that was, now you have been relegated to the Gaza Strip and to the West Bank. We gave you a large section of this region. You pushed your luck, and now you have these small areas, and the rest went to the Jewish people. So, since the inception of the state of Israel, they have been fighting wars on and off, obviously since the first day that it was put in place. They have gotten into it with Lebanon, with Jordan, with Egypt, obviously with the Palestinian people. But what needs to be pointed out here is that in none of those conflicts were the Jews the aggressor. They have always been the defender. They've been attacked and they've defended, with very, very few exceptions. And those exceptions were, proactive strikes. They see something happening in Lebanon and they see that they're about to attack them, so they proactively engage them to avoid that aggression. They flew a mission to Iraq and blew up their nuclear facility because they saw that as a threat, an existential threat to them. But they have never been the aggressor in any of these conflicts. All the Jewish people want to do is just live in Israel in peace. But, obviously there's this, centuries long divide on who owns that area, especially Jerusalem. So the other set of kind of mistruths and misconceptions that I hear, especially when you're watching people protesting and far left people, they talk about the colonization of the Palestinians by the Israelis. They're living in open air prisons. Israel is an apartheid state. Basically that the Jewish people are responsible for the plight of the Palestinian, 100% responsible for the plight of the Palestinian people. There's some truth to some of the things that they say. So when they talk about colonizations, there are colonies within the West Bank. There are Jewish people in Jewish settlements living in the West Bank. And that has been a huge point of contention for years and years and years. And one of the things that people point to. What you don't hear about that is that there are also Arab settlements inside of Israel, large, probably more so in Israel. The difference is, and this kind of goes back to the misconception of an apartheid state, is that the Israelis have no problem with the Arab settlements and with Arabs living there, as long as they're living in harmony with the Jewish people, and for the most part they are. Roughly 20% of the Israeli population are Arab Muslims. They hold seats within their government. They hold seats within their government institutions, like their legal system. There are Arab Muslim judges inside of Israel. So it's not really that big of an issue. So, and you could argue that the Palestinians are saying, okay, that's fine that Arab people live in Israel and you're okay with it, but we're not okay with it living in the West, you living in the West Bank, and we want you out. So that is a point of contention that needs to be recognized. But by no means are the Israelis trying to colonize. I think it's unfair to say that the Israelis are trying to take over the West Bank by colonizing it with Jewish people. I don't see that as happening. Now, the Gaza Strip is a completely different animal altogether. Since 2005, there have been no settlements, no military, no government oversight in Gaza, directly inside of Gaza. Now, the Israelis do control the Gaza airspace and their ports, and they do that for a very, very good reason. In Gaza, they import thousands and thousands of missiles. Even under the oversight and the overwatch of Israel, they still get thousands of rockets into the Gaza Strip, and then every few years they launch them at Israel in a surprise attack. And while the Iron Dome system in Israel takes most of them down, a few of them land, and they're trying to kill Israeli citizens. So the Israelis have no choice in that space. They, and that goes kind of to the open air prison thing too. Of course, when you have a population of people that openly say they want you wiped off the face of the earth, who are run by a government that's charter calls for the complete genocide of the Jewish people in Israel, you are going to put a wall around those people, keep them in that space, and have some oversight of what they're doing to defend yourself. Now, simple fact here is the Palestinian people are able to go anywhere they want. What I mean by that is the Israeli people are not holding Palestinians inside of Gaza. They can leave. They can go wherever they want if they have the right to go there. But they can't just, they can go to Egypt. They could go to Jordan. But Egypt and Jordan don't allow them to go there either. The Rafah crossing is at the southern end of Gaza, and they can't just walk across the Rafah crossing without having some sort of vetting that happens, just like going into Israel. And largely the part of that is Egypt and Jordan, these other countries don't want them there. They don't need that trouble of Hamas being inside of their territory. Egypt and Jordan have a very stable relationship now with Israel. And while publicly they'll say, we're not going to bring them here because they're a sovereign nation and they have the right to, reside in their own territory unabated. But the reality of it is they just don't want that trouble inside of their country. And that's why they don't allow them in there. So to the point where, all this kind of leads to this misconception that Israel is the reason why many Palestinians live in poverty and squalor and all these other things. But the simple fact of the matter is the international community sends billions and billions of dollars to Palestine. Palestine is a very, for the most part, two fairly, small sections of land when you look at it in relative to other countries. And those small areas have gotten 40 billion, with a B, billion dollars between 1994 and 2020. And then since 2014 to present, just in that time, have gotten over $5 billion. And you have to ask yourself, where does that money go? And the simple fact is it goes in there, then it goes to Hamas, and Hamas uses that money for Hamas's war machine. They use it to build tunnels, not hospitals. They use it to hoard fuel and food for Hamas, not give it to their people. So if all of this international money was being properly used to uplift the lives of Palestinians, instead of using it to try to kill Jewish people, the Palestinians would be in a much, much better place. So that needs to be clarified, is that Hamas cares about Hamas, not the Palestinian people. And it's clear when you look at the way they govern that space. So the other thing that you'll hear in these protests and from some other groups is that Israel is committing genocide, which on its face is some of the most hypocritical rhetoric that you'll ever hear, for the simple fact that Hamas's charter calls for the annihilation and genocide of the Jewish people. So while civilian casualties are a very, very unfortunate part of war and are going to be continued in this conflict based on the fighting conditions, collateral damage of civilian lives and infrastructure happens in war. It has happened in every war, especially since the invention of the bomb. And I can assure you that each target by the Israeli army is being weighed. If they have a large, a top level official that they want to take out, and there is 30, 40 people around that area, depending on how high level of an official it is or how large the infrastructure that they're trying to take out is, they will weigh that and say, is it worth it based on the casualties? And if it is, they'll take that strike. But let me be clear. Israel is not just indiscriminately killing civilians. They're not just dropping a 2,000-pound bomb in a market and taking out 1,000 people to kill one guy. I can tell you that that is not happening. As somebody who was in the military and has dealt with civilians on a personal and professional level, that is not happening. And I'm going to go into a little bit later, when we talk about the conflicts that have happened with Hamas in recent years, the restraint that the Israelis have had over the years is impressive, to say the least. So just to give you some quick numbers, in World War II, the Germans lost anywhere from 350 to 500,000 civilians during that war. In the same time frame, the British lost around 70,000. In Vietnam, the U.S. was responsible from anywhere from 30 to 60,000 civilian deaths just from bombings. And that's not including the collateral damage that happened in firefights and other forms of war. So why do I bring up these numbers? The reason is that all of those were tactical strikes that happened. And obviously, in World War II, we did not have such precision bombs. It was more carpet bombing to, an area, and it took out a lot of things around it. But there were always a strike to take out a plane factory or a tank factory or munitions depot. And there were civilians in and around those places that were working there or whatever, and they were killed. And it's terrible. There's no way for anyone to say, oh, well, like, too bad. It's absolutely awful when civilians are being killed in war. But again, civilian casualties are a part of war, and they will be a part of war for the foreseeable future. Now, the reason I bring this up is at no point in World War II, in Vietnam, or in any of these other conflicts where there were high levels of civilian casualties were these countries attempting genocide. Large-scale casualties do not equal genocide. Genocide is the attempt to wipe out a certain group of people off the face of the earth. Israel is not trying to wipe Palestinians off the face of the earth. If they wanted to, they could bomb every inch of Gaza in 3 days and kill as many people as they wanted to. But they're not. All these strikes are tactical strikes in a highly densely populated area, and the unfortunate part of that are civilian casualties. Now, let me be very clear. I think if there's one point to this whole entire video, is that Hamas is just as much, if not more, to blame for every Palestinian death that has occurred than Israel. And why do I say that? First and foremost, they attacked Israel in a barbaric way that they knew would generate this level of response. They knew that when they did this, they were going to bring the full weight of the Israeli military onto their population, and they did it anyway. So then they hide all of their leaders, infrastructure, operations center, weapons in mosques, hotels, schools. And then they layered that with innocent civilians on purpose. They have said outright that Hamas and Palestine are a nation of martyrs, meaning the people here are expendable and they will all die for the cause. So they are purposely putting their people in the way of the Israeli military in order to make them martyrs. So to go into another country and brutally murder the people of a nation that you hate is terrible. It's barbaric. But to do it to your own people it's just unthinkable that you would do that to your own people. And it's a win-win situation for Hamas. Either they put their stuff underneath a school and cover it with people, and Israel says, that's a little bit too much, we can't hit that, and they don't get bombed, or they do, and they get to take these people out into the street and say, look what you're doing, you're killing us, you're murdering women and children, you're committing genocide. Let me be, frank here. Hamas are animals. They're animals. And I know people are going to say, there's always blowback when you call a group of people animals, but they are animals. When you have a complete and total disregard for human life, innocent life, elderly people, women, children, your own population, zero empathy and zero concern for human life, that is what differentiates humans from animals. And when you don't have that, you are an animal. So when you're talking about Israel killing all these people, They are conducting military operations, and Hamas is putting those people in that way to the point where Israel drops pamphlets and said, we are going to be attacking this area, get out, and Hamas stops those people from leaving. Think about that. Since 2008, Hamas and Israel have gotten into it 5 times, including this conflict 5 times. And in those first 4 conflicts, only 71 Palestinians were killed. And that's, them shooting rockets, Israel firing rockets back onto those positions. And of course, same thing. They shoot them from a school, they cover it with people, and there's inevitable casualties. In that same time frame, they lost over 200 IDF soldiers. So that shows you the level of restraint that Israel has had over the years during these conflicts. And you could argue that if in 2008, and before I say this, I want to be very clear. This is not a condemnation or critique of the Israeli military or government in any way, shape, or form, because I'm coming at it from a hindsight being 2020 view, so it's not fair. But you could argue that if in 2008, when those first missiles were launched, they had performed the level of a campaign that they're doing right now and just wiped Hamas out end to end and just dealt with the optics and took out them as an organization end to end, there would still be 1,400 people alive today. And there would be, 100 and something families that weren't worrying where their family members were in somewhere inside of Gaza. And the other reason I bring this up is that if they don't do this now, Hamas has said outright, we are going to continue to do this over and over and over again. Israel has no choice but to go into Gaza, wipe out Hamas end to end at all costs. And while it is terrible that there are mounting civilian casualties, there is almost no way to conduct a military operation inside of Gaza without inflicting those level of casualties. And they need to do what needs to be done to protect their people from another attack like this. So, when you start to hear these terms like apartheid and colonization and genocide, what it really is being said underneath the covers are, yes, what Hamas did was bad, but there is no but here. Even if every single thing that was said about the Israelis is true, there is no justification for what happened. And when you hear them saying they're committing genocide, which is obviously untrue, you're hearing them say, we know what Hamas did was bad, but do you really need to go that far? But you're going too far in your response. It's moral equivocation. It's and anybody who's saying these things is either ignorant or dishonest, or both. And the response of the international community, including the U.S., our politicians, our government officials, out there have said things like Israel needs to have some restraint. You hear some of our politicians calling for an immediate ceasefire, protesters calling for an immediate ceasefire. Israel is a sovereign nation that was brutally, savagely attacked. They have every right in the world to defend themselves, and we as a country don't have any right to give direction or limit their actions. We lost about 3,000 people on 9/11. They lost, and look at our reaction over 20 years over losing 3,000 people. They lost 1,400 people, which is 0.015% of the Israeli population. If you killed 0.015% of the U.S. population, it would be 50,000 people. Imagine if somebody came over our border, brutally, savagely murdered 50,000 people, and then took another, I don't know, quick math, 7,000 people prisoner, and only gave half of them back. Imagine what our response would be. But furthermore, imagine if after 9/11, the international community came to the U.S. and said, hey, we know you guys got savagely attacked, killed 3,000 of your countrymen and women, but we think you guys should show a little restraint, tap the brakes a little bit. We would have told them where to go, and we would have had every right to do it. And also after 9/11, we had all these t-shirts and we had all these banners. We'll never forget what happened. The fact that we have American citizens marching in the street, supporting a Hamas organization, creating moral equivocation of what happened on October 7th, and U.S. officials trying to get Israel to slow down and have restraint after what happened, if it's clear that we clearly have forgotten, that we forgot where we were as a nation on 9/11 and what our response would have been if somebody had told us that. So I think we need to be reminded of what our actions were for 20 years in response to that and how many people we went after, and to be telling Israel to tone it down after 2 months is complete and total hypocrisy. Hypocrisy in its purest form. So, guys, I'm going to leave it there, but please share this with as many people as possible. People need to know the facts. This kind of oppressor mentality that is being propagated, and this moral equivocation is sickening, and it needs to stop. And while Israel is not without blame, this action, this attack cannot go without a reaction, because it will simply invite more violence in the future. So that's all I have for you today. As per usual, questions, comments, concerns, put them below and we'll get to them. And I again think that this is going to result in further action. So I'm sure we're going to be doing more videos on it. But guys, thanks for tuning in today.